The harsh current of the Cimarron River thrashed against her body as she surrendered to its pull, her lungs burning for air she no longer wanted. Rebecca Mason closed her eyes, ready for the darkness to claim her, when strong arms encircled her waist and yanked her toward the surface. She fought weakly against her rescuer, but his grip was iron as he hauled her to the muddy bank and dropped her onto solid ground. Water poured from her mouth as she coughed violently, her sodden dress weighing her down like chains. "Why?" she rasped, her voice barely audible over the river's roar. "Why save me?" She stared up at the tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun, his dripping hat creating a halo of water droplets around his weathered face. The cowboy knelt beside her, his blue eyes fierce as they met hers. "Because you're worth saving, madam," he said simply, his deep voice carrying a surety that made her want to weep. "Every soul is." Rebecca turned away, unable to bear the conviction in his gaze. He didn't know her, didn't know what she'd lost, didn't know why she'd walked into those rushing waters with no intention of walking back out. Colorado Territory, 1872. A land of promise for some, of desperation for others. For Rebecca Mason, it had become a place of endings. "Name's Thomas Blackwood," the cowboy said, wringing water from his hat. "Most folks call me Tom." He studied her with concern. "You got people nearby, miss?" Rebecca shook her head, her soaked auburn hair clinging to her pale face. "No," she whispered, "not anymore." Tom glanced at the sky, which was darkening with approaching night. "Storm's coming. My cabin's not far. Can you stand?" When she made no attempt to move, he sighed and gathered her into his arms as if she weighed nothing, despite her waterlogged clothes. Rebecca was too exhausted to protest as he carried her to his horse, a chestnut gelding that stood patiently nearby. "Hold on to Rusty's mane," Tom instructed as he hoisted her onto the saddle before swinging up behind her. His arms encircled her waist as he took the reins, his chest warm against her back. "It ain't proper, but it'll have to do." The ride passed in silence save for the rumble of distant thunder. Rebecca drifted in and out of awareness, the steady rhythm of the horse's gait, and the solid presence of the cowboy, behind her the only constants in a world that had become unbearably fluid. Tom's cabin appeared at the edge of a small clearing, a modest but sturdy structure with smoke curling from the chimney. He dismounted and lifted her down, his movements gentle despite his obvious strength. "My sister stays with me sometimes," he explained as he ushered her inside. "She keeps some clothes here. They might fit you." The cabin was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, a small kitchen area, and 2 doors that presumably led to bedrooms. The warmth from the banked fire enveloped Rebecca, making her realize how cold she truly was. Tom disappeared into one of the rooms and returned with a flannel nightgown and a woolen robe. "You can change in there," he said, nodding toward the bedroom. "I'll make some coffee." Rebecca clutched the dry clothes and moved woodenly toward the room. Once inside, she peeled off her sodden dress and undergarments, her fingers numb and clumsy. The nightgown was slightly large but blessedly warm and dry. When she emerged, Tom had a steaming cup waiting for her. "Drink," he said. "It'll warm you up." She accepted the cup, wrapping her fingers around its heat. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice stronger now but still rough. Tom settled into a chair across from her. "Found you trying to drown yourself in the Cimarron. Seems like the least I can do is make sure you don't catch your death from cold after I went to the trouble of pulling you out." His directness startled her. Most people would have pretended not to understand what she'd been doing. "My husband and son died of fever 2 months ago," she said suddenly, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I buried them together under a cottonwood tree outside of Pueblo." Tom's expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss, madam." "Rebecca," she corrected. "Rebecca Mason." "Rebecca," he repeated, her name sounding different in his low, gravelly voice. Thunder crashed outside and rain began to patter against the roof, soon becoming a steady downpour. Tom rose and added logs to the fire. "You can take my sister's room tonight," he said. "I'll sleep out here." Rebecca nodded, too drained to argue. As she stood to go to the bedroom, she swayed slightly, and Tom was immediately at her side, his hand steadying her elbow. "Easy now," he murmured. She looked up at him, really seeing him for the first time. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-browned skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. A scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into his dark beard. "Thank you," she said, though she wasn't sure if she meant it. "Get some rest," he replied. "Things might look different in the morning." Rebecca doubted that, but didn't say so. In the small bedroom, she slipped under the quilt and closed her eyes, expecting nightmares. Instead, exhaustion claimed her, and she fell into the deepest sleep she'd had since burying her family. Morning came with soft, golden light filtering through the curtains. For a moment, Rebecca was disoriented, until the events of the previous day came rushing back. She dressed in her own clothes, which Tom had hung by the fire to dry, and emerged to find him frying bacon and eggs. "Morning," he said, glancing up. "Thought you might be hungry." She was, surprisingly. The smell of food awakened an appetite she thought had died with her family. They ate in silence, the sizzling of the bacon and the occasional call of a bird outside the only sounds. When they'd finished, Tom cleared his throat. "Got a proposition for you, Miss Rebecca." She tensed, immediately wary, noticing her reaction. Tom quickly added, "Nothing improper. My sister Abigail was staying with me, helping with the house and such while I tend the cattle. But she's gotten herself engaged to a shopkeeper in town and moved there last week. I could use some help around here, and well, you look like you could use a place to stay, just until you figure things out." Rebecca stared at him. "You don't know me." "I know enough," he said simply. "You're grieving. You need time. I can offer you that along with food and shelter. In exchange, you help with cooking and such." He paused. "And you promise not to walk into any more rivers." The bluntness of his last condition made her flinch, but also, strangely, made her lips twitch in what might have become a smile under different circumstances. "Why would you trust me in your home?" she asked. Tom shrugged. "Got a good sense about people. Besides, ain't much to steal here even if you were the thieving type, which I don't reckon you are." Rebecca considered his offer. She had nowhere to go, no one waiting for her. She'd sold most of their belongings to pay for medicine that hadn't saved her husband and son. What little money remained had been spent on their burial. "All right," she said finally, "until I figure things out." Tom nodded, seemingly unsurprised by her acceptance. "I'll show you around then." The day passed in a blur of small tasks. Tom showed her the root cellar, the chicken coop, the small vegetable garden his sister had started. He explained his daily routine: up at dawn to check on the cattle, back midday for dinner, then more work until sunset. "I don't have a big spread," he admitted. "Just enough to get by. Do some work for the larger ranches when they need extra hands." Rebecca nodded, taking it all in. The physical labor of cleaning and cooking kept her mind occupied, gave her less time to dwell on what she'd lost. By evening, she was exhausted but somehow calmer than she'd been in weeks. After supper, Tom sat by the fire cleaning his rifle while Rebecca mended a shirt she'd found with a torn sleeve. The domesticity of the scene struck her suddenly, how quickly they'd fallen into a routine, as if they'd known each other longer than a day. "You have family, Mr. Blackwood?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Tom," he corrected. Just my sister now. Parents died when I was 17. Pa from a fall off a horse, Ma from a broken heart 6 months later. His hands never stopped their methodical work on the rifle. Raised Abigail best I could. She's 23 now, marrying a good man. You fought in the war? Rebecca asked, noting the way he held himself, the discipline in his movements. Tom nodded. Union cavalry, 4 years that felt like 40. He glanced at her. Your husband? Yes, Confederate infantry. We met after in Kansas. I was teaching at a small school and he came looking for work. She smiled faintly at the memory. James was kind, gentle, not like many men who came back from that war. And your boy, William, he was 5. Her throat tightened. He had his father's eyes and my stubbornness. Tom set aside his rifle. It ain't fair losing them like that. No, Rebecca agreed. It isn't. They lapsed into silence again, but it was different now, a silence of shared understanding rather than awkward unfamiliarity. Days turned into weeks. Rebecca settled into life at the cabin, finding comfort in the routine. She expanded the garden, gathered eggs from the chickens, prepared meals, and kept the cabin in order. Tom worked with his small herd of cattle and occasionally helped neighboring ranchers with roundups or branding. They fell into an easy companionship, talking over meals about everyday matters, the weather, the animals, news from town when Tom made his infrequent trips. They carefully avoided deeper subjects, as if by unspoken agreement. One evening in late May, a month after Tom had pulled her from the river, Rebecca was kneading bread dough when he returned from town earlier than expected. Got something for you, he said, reaching into his saddlebag. He withdrew a book, a collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson. Rebecca's hand stilled, flour dusting her forearms. How did you know? Tom looked slightly embarrassed. Noticed you looking at it last time we were in town. Thought you might like it. She wiped her hands and took the book, running her fingers over its leather cover. It was a small luxury, one she couldn't have justified purchasing for herself. Thank you, she said softly. It's very thoughtful. Tom shrugged, but a pleased expression crossed his face. Figured you might want something to read besides my old almanacs. That night after supper, Rebecca read a few poems aloud at Tom's request. He listened intently, his eyes closed, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. You've got a nice reading voice, he commented when she finished. Reminds me that there's more to life than cattle and crops. Rebecca felt a warm flush rise to her cheeks at the compliment. It had been so long since anyone had noticed anything about her beyond her grief. As spring gave way to summer, Rebecca began to feel the first stirrings of something she'd thought forever lost hope. The crushing weight of grief hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted, becoming something she could carry rather than something that carried her. She still had moments when the loss hit her anew, finding William's wooden horse in her pocket, remembering James's birthday, waking from dreams where they were still alive. But increasingly, there were also moments of unexpected joy, a magnificent sunset, the taste of fresh berries, the satisfaction of seeing bread rise perfectly. And there was Tom. Steady, patient Tom who never pushed but was always present. Who gave her space to grieve but refused to let her drown in that grief literally and figuratively. One sweltering July afternoon, Tom suggested they ride to a swimming hole he knew where they could cool off. Rebecca hesitated, the memory of the river still vivid, but eventually agreed. The swimming hole was lovely, a deep, clear pool beneath a small waterfall, shaded by towering cottonwoods. Tom discreetly disappeared behind some rocks, returning wearing only his trousers. Rebecca had brought along a simple bathing costume that had belonged to Abigail. I'll turn around while you change, Tom offered, facing away from her. When she was ready, Rebecca called to him softly. He turned, and something in his expression made her suddenly aware of her bare arms and legs, the way the wet fabric clung to her figure. "Water's nice," he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. "Come on in." Rebecca waded carefully into the pool, tensing as the water rose above her waist, memories of the Cimarron threatening to overwhelm her. "I've got you," Tom said, sensing her fear. He extended his hand. "Trust me." She took his hand, allowing him to guide her into deeper water. His palm was warm and calloused against hers, his grip secure. "That's it," he encouraged as she began to relax. "You're doing fine." They spent the afternoon swimming and talking more freely than they had before. Tom told her about his time in the war, about the nightmares that still sometimes woke him. Rebecca spoke of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her dreams of becoming a writer before life led her in a different direction. As the sun began to lower, they sat on sun-warmed rocks to dry off. Rebecca was combing her fingers through her wet hair when she noticed Tom watching her. "What is it?" she asked. "You're different today," he observed. "More alive." The word struck her. Alive. Yes, that was what she was feeling, truly alive again, not just existing. "I think I am," she agreed softly. That evening marked a shift between them. Their conversations deepened, venturing beyond daily matters into hopes, fears, beliefs. Rebecca began to see Tom not just as her rescuer or employer, but as a man, one with his own wounds and dreams. August brought a violent thunderstorm that frightened the cattle. Tom spent the night in the barn, calming the animals and ensuring none broke through the fencing. When he stumbled into the cabin at dawn, he was soaked and exhausted. Rebecca helped him out of his wet clothes, trying to maintain propriety while getting him warm and dry. As she brought him hot coffee, their fingers brushed, and she felt a jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with the storm's electricity. "You should rest," she told him, noticing the dark circles under his eyes. Tom nodded wearily. "Just for an hour or so. Need to check the north pasture later." "I'll wake you," she promised. When she went to rouse him 3 hours later, she paused in the doorway of his bedroom. He was sprawled across the bed, one arm flung above his head, his features relaxed in sleep. The vulnerability of him in that moment stirred something protective in her. Tom's eyes opened, finding her immediately. "Rebecca, I let you sleep a little longer," she admitted. "You needed it." He sat up, running a hand through his tousled hair. "Thank you." Their eyes held for a moment too long before Rebecca turned away, her heart beating strangely fast. As summer waned, Rebecca realized with a start that she'd been with Tom for nearly 4 months. What had begun as a temporary arrangement had evolved into something that felt increasingly permanent and increasingly precious. She was hanging laundry one September afternoon when riders approached 3 men, strangers. Rebecca tensed, wishing Tom wasn't out checking the herd. "Afternoon, madam," the leader called, touching his hat. "Is Thomas Blackwood about? He's checking cattle," Rebecca replied cautiously. "Expected back soon." "Can I help you?" The man dismounted, introducing himself as Frank Donovan, foreman of the Circle D Ranch. "We're looking to buy some cattle. Heard Blackwood might have a few head he's willing to part with." Rebecca invited them to wait, serving coffee on the porch. Tom returned shortly, greeting the men with recognition if not warmth. "Donovan," he acknowledged. "What brings you here?" The men discussed cattle prices while Rebecca prepared a light meal. She couldn't help noticing how the youngest rider kept glancing her way, or how Tom's jaw tightened each time he did. As the men prepared to leave, Donovan hesitated. "Didn't know you'd gotten married, Blackwood. Congratulations." Before either could correct him, the young rider interjected, "Pretty wife you've got, lucky man." Tom's expression darkened. "Mrs. Mason is my housekeeper," he said curtly, "and deserving of respect." The young man flushed, mumbling an apology before mounting his horse. After they'd gone, an awkward silence fell between Tom and Rebecca. "I apologize for their assumption," Tom finally said. "No harm to your reputation was intended." "It's a natural assumption," Rebecca replied. "A woman living in a man's home." Tom's eyes met hers. "Is it? Does it trouble you?" "What people might think." Rebecca considered the question. Once she would have been mortified at the implication. Now she found herself more concerned with how Tom felt about it. "Not if it doesn't trouble you," she said carefully. Something shifted in Tom's expression. "The only thing that troubles me," he said slowly, "is that it ain't true." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Rebecca's breath caught. "Tom," she began, uncertain what she wanted to say. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes. "I never expected to feel this way again," he said quietly. "After the war, I figured some parts of me were dead for good. Then I pulled you from that river and something woke up." Rebecca felt tears gathering. "I went into that river because I thought my life was over," she whispered. "I was wrong." Tom's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle as a prayer. "Rebecca," he breathed, and then his lips were on hers, tentative at first, then with growing certainty. The kiss deepened, speaking of longing and healing and possibility. When they finally parted, Tom rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "Have for a while now." Rebecca closed her eyes, letting the words wash over her. Loving Tom didn't erase her love for James, she realized. Her heart had simply expanded to hold both. "I love you too," she replied, the words feeling both foreign and right on her tongue. Tom's smile was like sunrise breaking across his face. He gathered her close, his arms strong around her. "I don't want to rush you," he said against her hair. "We can take all the time you need." Rebecca nodded, grateful for his understanding. "I'd like to visit their graves," she said softly, before we move forward, to say goodbye properly." Tom pulled back to look at her. "Of course. We can go whenever you're ready." 2 weeks later, they made the journey to Pueblo. The cottonwood tree was easy to find, its leaves beginning to turn gold with autumn's approach. The small markers beneath it were weathered but intact. Rebecca knelt before them, placing wildflowers she'd gathered on the journey. Tom stood a respectful distance away, giving her privacy for this moment. "I miss you both every day," she whispered to the graves. "I'll always love you, but I've found a reason to keep living, a man who saved me in more ways than one." She touched each marker gently. "I think you would have liked him, James. And William, he's good with horses, just like you wanted to be." She stayed for a while longer, speaking softly to her lost family, tears flowing freely. When she finally rose and turned, Tom was waiting, solid and patient as always. "Thank you for bringing me," she said, taking his offered hand. "You needed to come," he replied simply. They rode back to the cabin in companionable silence, the shared experience drawing them closer. That night, Rebecca moved her things into Tom's room, and they began their life together in earnest. October brought their wedding, a simple ceremony in the town church with Abigail and her fiancé as witnesses. Rebecca wore a new blue dress, and Tom looked uncommonly handsome in a suit he'd purchased for the occasion. "Never thought I'd be this happy again," Tom murmured as they danced at the small celebration afterward. Rebecca smiled up at him. "Nor I. It feels like a gift I don't deserve." "You deserve every happiness," Tom said firmly. "And I aim to spend my life making sure you have it." Their first months as husband and wife passed in a contented blur. They expanded the garden and added to the herd. Tom built more shelves for Rebecca's growing collection of books, and she sewed curtains that brightened the cabin's interior. Winter arrived with heavy snow that isolated them for weeks at a time. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud or simply talking. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, Tom carving wood while Rebecca wrote in the journal he'd given her as a wedding present. "What are you writing?" he asked one night, curious. Rebecca hesitated, then passed him the journal. "Our story," she admitted. "How you pulled me from the river. How you saved me." Tom read a few pages, his expression thoughtful. "You've got a way with words," he said finally. "You should try to get these published someday." She smiled at his confidence in her. "Perhaps I will." Spring came early that year, bringing with it new calves and fresh possibilities. One morning in April, almost exactly a year after Tom had pulled her from the Cimarron, Rebecca woke with a revelation. "Tom," she said, watching him dress for the day's work, "I think I'm with child." His hand stilled on his shirt buttons. "Are you certain?" She nodded, her hand going to her still flat stomach. "Fairly certain." In 2 strides, Tom was at her side, gathering her into his arms. "A baby," he whispered, awe in his voice. "Our baby." Rebecca felt joy bubbling up inside her, but also a twinge of fear. What if Tom placed a gentle finger on her lips? "No what-ifs," he said firmly. "This child will be loved and will face whatever comes together." As her pregnancy progressed, Rebecca blossomed. The sickness of early pregnancy gave way to an energy that surprised them both. She continued her writing, filling journal after journal with stories, some based on their lives, others pure imagination. Tom hovered protectively, insisting on taking over the more strenuous chores despite her protests that she was perfectly capable. "Humor me," he would say, kissing her forehead. "I've waited too long for this happiness to take any chances with it." In late November, as the first snow dusted the ground, Rebecca went into labor. Abigail, now married and living in town, came to assist, along with the local midwife. The labor was long and difficult. Tom paced outside, driven from the bedroom by the women but refusing to leave the cabin. When he finally heard a baby's cry, he nearly broke down the door in his haste to enter. Rebecca lay exhausted but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "We have a daughter," she said, her voice weak but joyful. Tom approached the bed hesitantly, overwhelmed by the moment. The midwife placed the infant in his arms, and he stared down at the tiny face in wonder. "She's perfect," he breathed. "Just like her mother." They named her Hope, a testament to what they'd found in each other. As Tom placed their daughter in her cradle that night, Rebecca watched him from the bed. "Worth saving?" she asked softly, echoing her question from the riverbank. Tom turned to her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Every single day," he answered, coming to sit beside her. "You, me, our daughter, we're all worth saving, worth fighting for, worth living for." Rebecca reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. "I'm glad you pulled me from that river," she said, "even though I wasn't at the time." "Best thing I ever did," Tom replied, bringing her hand to his lips. "Saving you saved me too." The years passed, bringing changes both expected and surprising. Hope grew into a spirited girl with her father's blue eyes and her mother's auburn hair. 2 years after her birth, she was joined by a brother they named William Thomas, in honor of the past and present. Rebecca's writings found their way to a publisher in Denver, who printed her stories of frontier life in a collection that gained modest popularity. Tom expanded their ranch, eventually building a larger house to accommodate their growing family. There were hard times, droughts that threatened the cattle, a winter illness that nearly took young William, the death of Abigail's husband in a hunting accident. But through it all, Tom and Rebecca faced life together, their bond strengthening with each challenge overcome. On the 10th anniversary of the day, Tom pulled Rebecca from the river. They took their children on a picnic to the swimming hole, where they had first begun to acknowledge their feelings for each other. While the children splashed in the shallows under Abigail's watchful eye, Tom and Rebecca sat on the same sun-warmed rocks where they had sat a decade earlier. "Happy anniversary," Tom said, presenting her with a small wooden box. Inside was a silver locket. When Rebecca opened it, she found a tiny sketch of the Cimarron River on one side and their family on the other. "To remember where we began," Tom explained, "and how far we've come." Rebecca touched the locket reverently. "I never thought I could be this happy again," she admitted. "That day in the river, I truly believed my life was over." "And I believed I was meant to live alone," Tom replied. "We were both wrong, thank God." Rebecca leaned against his shoulder, watching their children play. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you hadn't been riding by the river that day?" Tom's arm tightened around her. "I don't believe it was chance," he said seriously. "Some things are meant to be, Rebecca. You and me, our family, we were written in the stars long before we knew it." Rebecca smiled, thinking of all the twists and turns that had led them to this moment. The grief that had driven her to the river, the instinct that had led Tom to save her, the slow, healing journey from despair to hope to love. "Worth saving," she murmured, echoing the words that had begun their story. "Always," Tom replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Every single day." As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the water, Rebecca watched her family, Tom teaching William to skip stones, Hope collecting wildflowers with her aunt, the baby sleeping peacefully in a makeshift cradle fashioned from a blanket. This was her life now, so different from what she had once imagined, yet so much richer, deeper, more meaningful than she could have dreamed. A life built from the ashes of despair, watered by tears of both sorrow and joy, and blooming now under the patient tending of love. "Time to head home," Tom called, gathering their belongings as the children reluctantly left the water home. Once, that word had meant only loss to Rebecca. Now it meant Tom's steady presence, their children's laughter, the life they had built together. As they rode back to the ranch, Rebecca in the wagon with the children while Tom rode alongside, she silently thanked the river that had tried to take her life, but had instead given her a new one. The sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold as they made their way home together, alive and worth saving. Years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Hope grew into a young woman with her father's quiet strength and her mother's love of words. William became a skilled horseman who could gentle even the wildest Mustang. Their youngest, Emma, born when Rebecca was nearly 40, inherited her father's blue eyes and her mother's determination. Rebecca's writing brought her modest fame in literary circles. Her collection of frontier stories was joined by a novel, then another, each drawing on her experiences but transformed by her imagination. Tom read every word she wrote, proud of the way she captured the beauty and hardship of their life on the frontier. The ranch prospered under Tom's careful management. What had begun as a small homestead with a few dozen cattle grew into a respectable operation that allowed them to live comfortably, if never luxuriously. More importantly, it gave them independence and the means to provide their children with opportunities neither Tom nor Rebecca had enjoyed in their own youth. Hope showed an aptitude for teaching, and at 18, went to Denver to attend a normal school. Her departure was the first real separation the family had experienced, and Rebecca found herself standing at the window each evening, watching the road that would eventually bring her daughter home for holidays and summer breaks. "She'll be fine," Tom assured her, though Rebecca noticed how often he rode to town to check for letters. "She's got your brains and my stubbornness." "That's what worries me," Rebecca replied with a smile. William, at 16, was Tom's right hand on the ranch, already showing the judgment and patience that would make him an excellent rancher in his own right. Emma, at 12, divided her time between helping her mother with household tasks and following her father and brother around the ranch, absorbing every aspect of its operation. Life settled into new rhythms as the children grew and their needs changed. Rebecca and Tom found themselves with more time alone together, rediscovering the quiet companionship that had first drawn them to each other. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Tom took Rebecca's hand, his touch as familiar and essential to her as breathing. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked. "At the river?" Rebecca nodded. She thought of it often, though the sharp edges of the memory had softened with time. "I was so certain I had nothing left to live for," she said softly. "How wrong I was." Tom's thumb traced circles on her palm. "I remember how angry you were that I'd pulled you out," he said, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "You looked like a half-drowned cat, all fury and no strength to back it up." Rebecca laughed, leaning against his shoulder. "I was furious," she admitted, "and terrified. Living seemed harder than dying at that point." "And now?" Tom asked, his voice serious despite the lightness of their reminiscence. Rebecca considered the question, looking out over the land they'd worked together, the home they'd built, thinking of the children they'd raised and the life they'd created from what had once been only pain and loss. "Now," she said slowly, "I understand that grief isn't the end of the story. It's just a chapter, a painful, necessary chapter, but not the whole book." Tom nodded, his eyes reflecting the sunset's glow. "You taught me that," he said. "Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You made me live again." Rebecca turned to face him, this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. At 60, his hair was more silver than brown, his face lined by years of sun and weather, but his eyes were the same clear blue that had looked into hers that day on the riverbank and declared her worth saving. "We saved each other," she said simply. As darkness fell, they remained on the porch, talking of the past and planning for the future. William would take over more of the ranch operations soon. Hope had written of a young doctor in Denver who was courting her. Emma was showing signs of Rebecca's literary talent and Tom's affinity for horses in equal measure. "We did all right, didn't we?" Tom asked as they finally rose to go inside. Rebecca looked at him, this man who had been her rescuer, her employer, her friend, her husband, her partner in all things for over 30 years. "We did more than all right," she assured him. "We built a life worth living." Later that night, lying beside Tom in the darkness, Rebecca thought about the long, winding path that had led her to this moment, the loss that had driven her to despair, the chance encounter that had saved her life, the slow awakening to the possibility of loving again. The family they had created together. "Tom," she whispered, unsure if he was still awake. His voice was drowsy but attentive. "Thank you for pulling me from the river." His arm tightened around her. "Thank you for being worth the effort," he replied, his voice warm with affection. Rebecca smiled in the darkness, content in the knowledge that some endings were really beginnings in disguise, and that sometimes salvation came in the form of a cowboy who refused to let go.